Welcome to What Has the Environment Ever Done for Us? And this seems to be our fifth or sixth episode. I think it's our fifth. And now we're moving on to the lofty discussions of transport and how we move around this world in a different way. But we're going to focus on transport across the country, on roads and highways. And we've got two amazing guests who are going to help us navigate that journey today. With me, as ever, is Keith Mitchell, Jonathan Riggle, Vicky Slade. We were going to have Jenny Hughes, who's one of our regulars, but she had a better offer, and all of us are just going to take our time to find out what could be better than being with us this afternoon. But, you know, we'll get there eventually. One of our guests is Greg Marsden, who's Professor of Transport Governance at the Institute of Transport Studies at the University of Leeds, and he's the Network Director of Decarbonate, which got me straight into Doctor Who, not the Doctor Who. And James Birch joins us. James is the Managing Director of Kier Highways, the local side, and he is in charge of making sure that we can drive neatly, tidily down a road with as fewer potholes as possible. And he makes politicians terribly excited with his pothole repairing machines. Who could want for more of a job than having a potholing machine going around the country? So what we're going to start off is our normal routine of going through the news. And Johnny, I understand that you've calmed down a lot, but a few politicians wound you up a little bit. Why was that?
Well, it wasn't the politicians. It was the response by a small number of scientists who use this expression that you see a lot nowadays. Scientists say. It's the general use of the word scientist to justify a statement, and just because a scientist says it doesn't mean it's true. But I've calmed down, Nick, and as a scientist and a geographer, I'm just going to make sure that I don't start sentences with scientists say. So the background to this, though, was last week was the World Climate Summit, where 40 of the leading countries came together on a mega Teams call. I didn't find out whether they use Zoom or Teams or what structure they use to talk about their collective obligations towards climate change. And it was a real kind of like a prequel to COP26 in November. What we saw was countries coming forth and redefining their nationally determined contributions and their targets that they are going to apply to. So we saw Boris Johnson, he's gone from mung beans to bunny huggers now. So I know it kind of marginally amuses me, but it's pretty derisory to the environment sector that we get lumped into being bunny huggers. Regaling the 78% reduction by 2035, which is the UK Climate Change Committee recommendation. So he's taken that recommendation on. The United States have stated their targets roughly around 50% compared to their 2005 levels by 2030. Canada, fairly similar, 45% roughly by 2030. Australia, slightly lower, 25%. By 2030. But herein is an interesting conversation that ensued out the back end. These are just targets. There's no substance behind them, although the United States did come out with a very, very long list of activities that they will be undertaking, finance mechanisms, which was really good to see them at the table and really putting a flag in the ground there. Some of the articles that came out, one in particular that you mentioned beforehand, was doing a lot of finger pointing about how do you achieve a 78% reduction by 2035 and pointing out the elephants in the room. In fact, there's so many elephants, I think we've now got a sanctuary rather than just one elephant in the room. And I think it's quite a nice way of thinking this sanctuary of elephants that we've got, but it really doesn't help anybody continually pointing out the problems that we all know exist already. And I think really it's time for scientists to knuckle down rather than pointing out the kind of potential failures of not achieving it, or work towards the actual activities we need to achieve these outcomes. It doesn't really help matters just pointing out the problems. Not least, some of the big elephants in the room associated with there was an article or a paper written by the United Nations at the end of last year, December 2020, with regards, showing some of the massive gaps in terms of emissions between those who have and those who don't have. 1% of the most affluent people in the world have doubled the carbon footprint compared to the bottom 50%. So when it comes to making changes, the changes need to be specific and bespoke to particular demographics. Yes, there will be a lot of lifestyle changes, but probably more likely lifestyle changes to those at that top 1% and not those at the bottom 50%. And that's a really key thing, the messages that need to get out, not least, and bring us into the topic of conversation today, transport. You can see how people who have a large house, if you've got 2 people living in a 10-bedroom house, they're going to have a bigger carbon footprint than 5 people living in a 1-bedroom house. If you've got 2 or 3 cars, if you've got a very, very large SUV because it shows your affluence and your sense of purpose and ego, look at me, I've got a very big car, aren't I important? Those are the types of lifestyle changes that are probably going to need to be changed. So when we come onto transport and we look at the transport system and structure, if we're going to change lifestyles, how does the transport infrastructure change to meet that? Are we going to have people in single vehicles, very large vehicles, 30 miles per gallon, spewing out diesel fumes, petrol fumes, or everything going to be completely different? And I think at this point, I will pass over to Vicky and Keith to pick up that mantle on, so what will transport look like and how will it adapt to a future related to climate change?
Johnny, it's interesting you hate the term scientists say, because I hate the phrase politicians do or don't or lie or whatever. The scientist is a pretty broad church, shall we say, and the same is true for politicians, that we obviously go by various other negative phrases, and I can't bear it when we're lumped together either. So, I'm with you on that one. As Nick already introduced James and Greg, it's quite interesting. You should talk about the targets versus the reality, because I was talking to Greg last month and reading one of the papers that he's written, which we'll come on to, and he was talking about the disconnect between policy goals and policy actions. And it feels like what happened last week was another set of goals, but with America aside, not a lot of action. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out perhaps as we approach COP26. Just a couple of facts to get us going. 21%, a fifth of our greenhouse gases come from transport in this country. And can you believe it, in 2019, there was a 2% increase just in that 1 year in the number of cars. This is obviously the year before COVID. But the market share of new EVs is only 14%. So electric vehicles, that they're ramping up, but are they the solution? I don't know. I'm hoping that Greg and James will help us understand whether behaviour change is the key, or is it actually about alternative fuels, alternative ways of driving. So we've already introduced both James and Greg, but I'm going to start by asking Greg a few questions, because Greg, you've got a really interesting background. Your sort of escalation from researcher to professor via the Institute. Tell us a bit about why transport. Have you always been, did you start life as a petrol head or and now a cyclist, or have you always been, on the sort of active transport sort of journey?
I came into my career through civil engineering. So I did a civil engineering degree at Nottingham, did a couple of summer placements on site with land construction, learnt a lot of bad language during that time, and then just took some transport options in my final year, got really interested in that, and then did a PhD in urban air quality, as it was a big issue back in the mid 1990s. A lot of people thought it would be solved by now because of technology, and here we are in 2020 still with massive urban air quality problems, and that's maybe an interesting rider to kind of just put out there what we imagine is possible and deliverable through technology, and we kind of bet and rely on that saving us down the line, but it doesn't always play out that way.
And it's interesting that it's taken all that time to get the first inquest to confirm a death as a direct result of air quality with that young girl last year. You know, so that's a massive long journey before we actually see that taken seriously. Is that surprising to you that that's taken so long? And do you think that's going to drive more decision-making change in sort of government?
I think it's a really important legal precedent. I mean, it's surprising given that we've known that it's 40,000 plus, you know, early deaths a year that have been caused by air quality, and that's been known since the 1990s. And yet we've been sort of okay letting that happen, you know, promising slow improvements. And when you compare that with the scale of response to COVID, you can't help but conclude that we've just been pretty complacent about actually the health impacts and the health impacts on the poorest, you know, who tend to be disproportionately affected by urban air quality because they live near the busiest roads, and they're not the ones that are driving the cars through those busiest areas a lot of the time.
It is ironic, isn't it, when we see the objections against the sort of the low traffic neighbourhoods, and we see the objections to the cycle lanes and things like that, that actually you talk to people who live within them, and it primarily that they support them because actually their quality of life, their air quality is improved. It is the people who are trying to save 2.2 minutes on their journey, which they didn't need to make in the first place. You talked about in one of your recent studies about the potential we have if the behaviour changes from COVID, more people working from home when we all return to the offices, we have the potential to have a permanent half-term congestion level, which anyone who's ever tried to go out and noticed and wondered why on earth the traffic has suddenly disappeared but doesn't have kids are like, aha, it must be half term. Do you think that that's true? Do you think there's enough capacity in behaviour change to shift that congestion downwards? And if you do, what impact does that have on our need for those roads?
Okay, so whether you believe it or not, it's a really interesting one. We're all perfectly prepared to believe that we can have 100% electrification and we can sort out goods vehicles and all these other things. So we don't even have technological solutions for. And yet when it comes to behaviour change, we're all sort of like, well, will people accept that? You know, so we're prepared to imagine all sorts of things in one area and find it difficult in the other. So the reason we kind of did the calculations on the COVID things, we've got this longitudinal study going on, and it's obvious that not everyone's going to want to continue to stay at home all of the time. It does get incredibly dull at times, doesn't it? And people want to go and meet for certain things. I think meeting face to face, it's reinforced our value of it. But for other things, it's opened up opportunities to, would we have been doing this pre-COVID? Possibly not. But this sort of thing has become normal, and we're now exchanging in all sorts of different ways. Anyway, we just thought, for those people who used to drive and have been working from home, what if they stayed at home 2 days a week? And that gives you the half-term effect. And that to me doesn't feel like it's an outrageous ask of the population, and it doesn't feel like it's unworkable, and it feels like a tangible benefit that we could all work with. So, why can't we grab hold of that? And I'm really surprised by just how vacant the message has been in central government about this. It's simple messages, but let's get the economy moving, let's get people back into city centres. It just feels like we're missing like a golden opportunity to reinforce some of what's going to happen, whether we have policy for it or not. The question is, do we try and create something really good here, or do we let it slide by?
I suppose if you also combine that with reducing the impact of the school run itself, because the number of people. I mean, I saw a cartoon today about parents driving their small child to school in a great big SUV. I was commenting on the fact my kids cycle to school, have done since they were 9. If you can have a small shift in the school run as well, then actually it could be like the summer holidays, all year round, which would be even better.
Yeah, we haven't seen any evidence of that so far in our data, that people,
No
even though
evidence
people
in
have
a
been at
reduced
home more,
school
they
run.
have not necessarily done more of the school run in more sustainable ways. Although, these are pretty odd times, aren't they? So I wouldn't go too early with what, whether that evidence is conclusive or not. I don't know what the scientists say, Johnny.
What does the scientist say,
Ask
Johnny?
them all at the same time.
Yeah.
So, Greg, what interests me about your conclusion there is that if we are to take more seriously the potential for some elements of behaviour change to stick, and we want to try and recover the economy back from whence it came, what does a government do? Because at the moment, it seems to me that you're saying in your work at a crossroads, that we're saying at the moment we've got a government who wants to build back anything, actually, because that's good for the economy. But building back better needs us to rethink what it is that we're building, and we don't seem to be doing that at the moment. And so my question would be, if you were in their shoes, what would you be looking at? What would you be trying to get them to rethink? And what does that mean for us as industry professionals? That's something I think we need to start thinking about.
So I think the obvious area to invest in, we need more people to walk and cycle. We need more people to use the bus and public transport, and we need fewer people driving. And I haven't seen a climate analysis from any local authority, regional or subnational transport body that doesn't come to that conclusion. Given what we've just gone through with a kind of public health emergency, we need more people to be out and about, healthy and active. So I think the sensible thing to do would be to repurpose the funding we've got in the transport sector and put it more locally. I mean, James will know what the scale of the infrastructure maintenance backlog is. Let's not see it as a maintenance backlog. Let's see it as a massive urban renewal program where repurposing all of the streets is thought through in the way that we can, generate the best kind of total social outcomes, rather than just putting the roads back the way that we have done in as low a cost as we can. And that will create lots of jobs. It's also opens up, I think, opportunities to smaller contractors that kind of big infrastructure projects don't. I think that's it's not a non-economic growth investment to do that. But I think going down the 27 billion on RIS2, when we just proved that we can do a lot of what we used to do without travelling, I mean, how is that actually going to grow the economy? I'm struggling to see the logic that follows. Never mind the carbon implications that would follow.
Yeah, I think it was something that we covered a bit last month, talking about the challenge to the roads investment strategy, and the potential that has for changing the way government policy is targeted at transport infrastructure at the moment. I think, but what I haven't yet seen, and James, perhaps you might be seeing this in the local infrastructure delivery market, is any sense that that's an active discussion between contractors, local authorities? Is that something that you're beginning to see?
We are, yeah, we certainly are. I mean, I think there will always be a need for the highway network. It's the cornerstone of the economy, and will continue to be so. We do move a lot by road. I think what will change and what needs to change is, as you said, Greg, the way people use it and the types of vehicles moving on the network. Eventually, there won't be fossil fuel vehicles. There'll be different types of electric, hydrogen-powered vehicles, HVOs, and there's likely to be more non-motorised users, i.e. electric scooters, and probably more communal travel, sort of electric shuttle buses and the like. We're starting to see, certainly in London, we do a lot of work in London, we're starting to see big investments in active travel. So cycle superhighways, walking, shared spaces. And I think most of our local authority clients are moving towards not just putting back the road as it always was, but looking at walking, looking at cycling, looking at more infrastructure around bus lanes and making public transport more accessible and more feasible. So we are seeing a lot of different types of works come through to what we deliver in the local market, so working with local authorities on the local road network. I think if you look at the Highways England road network, that will change as well. I think Highways England have committed quite a lot in terms of how they will be looking at the electric charging infrastructure and never being too far away from electric charging points and that kind of thing, to look at changing the modal shift to non-fossil fuel vehicles. But yeah, we are certainly seeing the local authorities we work with looking at that modal shift and now starting to invest more in, rather than just resurface the road as it's always been resurfaced and fill the potholes, which they need to do, but taking the opportunity to look at different uses of the network as well and get more into the network. So we are seeing a change, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. Sorry, Vicky. You're on mute, Vicky.
On mute.
That's because the husband just came back in to deal with our bees. James, I'm interested in how you see. So absolutely, we need to look at the behaviour change and we need to shift some of the road usage. But how do you see the inevitable changes in our climate patterns affecting the road network, both in terms of the impact of the, from flooding and whatever, and how you behave in terms of whether you repair or replace? Yeah. Is it going to become more complicated?
I think it's always been complicated, and I think, as you said at the beginning, I probably frustrate a lot of politicians by talking about it. It's not just filling a pothole, there's more to it than filling a pothole and that kind of thing, and the infrastructure that goes around and how we fill potholes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, as a business, we've completed a climate change risk assessment, and it's highlighted a number of risks and makes recommendations on what we need to do around climate change. So I think more obvious changes are related to extreme weather, as you said there. So heat wave events, for example, could increase wildfires on the highway verge. So we should be looking at changes to the way we maintain softer state regimes, sort of including fire breaks in high risk areas, that kind of things, heathlands and gorse. Training frontline staff on what to do if they identify a wildfire. So there's a lot of things that we do that go on behind the scenes around climate change and how it will impact us on the front line. Flooding, very big. And I think there's two things here. There's one is around future-proofing the future network. So when we design and build new roads and we design and build new infrastructure improvements, looking at how we better deal with flood events. So more use of SUDs, increasing our drainage capacity, and a better understanding use and investment in the highway verge, and how green infrastructure provides those vital ecosystems that will deal with storms. I think a bigger part of what we do, certainly across the network, is around winter maintenance. And this has always been an interesting one, because when you think of winter maintenance, you think of it's going to get cold, you need to grit the roads. We do, but what we're seeing and what we've seen over sort of a number of our contract profiles is that we have a fixed winter season that's kind of end of October to beginning of April, whereby we have we're contracted to grit the roads. We're now seeing it being milder and wetter in October, November, December. So we've got inefficiencies where we're not gritting, but we should be looking at flood relief systems. So in Shropshire, we had some immense flooding, as you'll be aware, last winter, whereby we were, I guess, geared up to an extent to be out gritting, and we were out giving out sandbags and doing flood relief. And then I think as you look at now, we were coming up to May, and it's still -2 in the morning. So we're out gritting more now. So I think there's a big thing around how we traditionally look at the seasons, certainly from a highways maintenance point of view, to need to work more with our clients and to not just develop those winter maintenance plans, but look at severe weather plans, much more, as I said, focusing on flooding, the freeze, thaw, and looking at how we, not quite modal shift, but how we shift our response to the changing weather conditions. And I mean, we go on to the Marks and Spencer's thing about the bees and the wrong type of bees and that kind of thing. But a lot of our softer state, we're now looking at, certainly on the Highways England network, can we plant different things and rebuild ecosystems to regenerate that? Because, I mean, as we know, the bees create most of the things that we have. Without them, there wouldn't be much left. So there's a lot of thinking around how do we react to a climate emergency. A number of local authorities have obviously now announced climate emergencies. So there's a lot of work going on with our clients about how we do change the way we provide our service. The whole 3-4 pattern with filling potholes, I won't bore you with the technical side of that. But yes, we are looking at different pothole machines. We're looking at different ways to fill roads. We're looking at reusing the existing material and putting it back into the roads, again, to reduce that carbon footprint and looking at how we can reduce the impact from our operations. So yeah, there is a lot to think about.
Greg, I mean, it's not just, I mean, you talk about severe weather. One of the biggest excuses that we hear as sort of, local community champions, let's call us that, and not politicians, is, well, we can't all get on our bikes and walk because it rains a lot here and we have hills and it's windy. And I read today that actually the part of the Netherlands that has the biggest capacity in bicycles is the most hilly. Now, I'm sure comparatively it's not, like the UK. But I'm just wondering, apart from, simply making that change to work at home and shift over, what other changes in our placemaking do we need to do around decarbonising transport?
I absolutely hate the absolutism of the arguments that we end up in transport. It's too hilly, it's too wet. Nobody's saying that everyone has to cycle every day of the year for every activity that they undertake. If everyone did 20% fewer trips by car, particularly those in the top 3 income quintiles, or our top half of our earners were using the car 1 day a week less, it would make a huge difference to mileage. So that to me is the way we frame the whole discussion is part of the problem. It ends up ruling stuff out before we've even had a sensible discussion about what it would mean.
But we also frame the discussion very much around, as we have been today, actually, about car users versus public transport users versus active travel, rather than, normal human beings who do a bit of this and do a bit of that and do a bit of the other. And actually, also the other part of the argument, which is around continued investment in rail and public transport post-pandemic, and the extent to which that will continue to play a fundamental role in the future decarbonised transport network, and how our road system ought to be playing a subsidiary part of that wider national network of strategic connections. There doesn't seem to be that sort of debate about the complexity of our transport systems. It seems to be very dogmatically about one or the other.
But one of the things that I'm interested in listening to all of what you're saying is one of our viewers has brought up about the government's problem with wanting everyone to spend money on retail. If the level of traffic is reduced and it's easier to move around locally and more of us are staying local, then all our town centres that actually have lost tremendous amount of activity could be the beneficiaries, which would change the use of local roads and maybe take the level of usage of the major network down considerably, as we're not going into London. I'm quite intrigued that I don't hear people talk. The trains are empty. I went up to London last week and it was nice to have a carriage to myself. And that's a huge opportunity. The marketing of that availability, it is a huge opportunity for us to have better roads and parking again in our town centres, because we're actually starting to live in our town centres again. Do you think that you made a comment earlier, Greg, that politicians weren't listening to the opportunity? Do you think that we're missing a trick, that we've just not realised what's happened around us enough?
I think this is a really interesting and difficult one, right? Because there are some businesses that are really going to suffer as a result of lower footfall. If people do commute into their place of work less frequently, then the kind of service retail catering industry around that kind of office-based work is not going to be quite as big as it as it was. We might see some downsizing of offices over time, although that's, it's a bit sticky, the market. People have got leases and so on. That take a while to adjust. But, those places like city centres and town centres are the most accessible bits of our country. They're really well located for all sorts of public transport and intercity connectivity. If we could make them, open to a more diverse set of people who want to live in them, if we can put some green space investment back into city centres, then, I think there would be a real benefit, and it would make those places, again, it would help with their revitalisation. I can't see us going back to the previous scale of retail in town and city centres. I mean, we jumped from like 17% of stuff being bought online by value to 35% during the pandemic. Yeah, it's going to go back again. There's big queues outside Primark and whatever, but it's going to go back to what, 25%, 30%. That's gone now. It's not. I can't see that coming back. So what are we going to do? We need to jump on it and capitalise. And that's the part of the problem. I think this is what Johnny was getting to earlier. We've got to do stuff now. We've got to see those opportunities and make them happen in the next 5 or 10 years. We can't wait 10 years for stuff to happen.
And so what do we do though about local people who feel very uncomfortable about that transition? Because Vicky, in her role, is facing people who are very unhappy about seeing change without necessarily feeling as though they're being consulted on it. That there is that tension, isn't there?
But can I just add, before Greg comes up with his solution, just to bring James in as well, is it isn't just about being unhappy about it. It's about the fact that when a road gets resurfaced, typically the pavement doesn't. I mean, I've now taken up a lot of cycling and walking, and honestly, I'm lucky I've still got all my own teeth. The amount of dodgy routes that are coming through all of the pavements I need to sign, these shared pavements, and yet you look at the road, beautifully smooth. So, elderly people who are trying to go to bikes, people who wouldn't, not the Lycra Club Brigade, the everyday resident who wants to get on a bike is being put off doing so because the state of the pavements and cycleways aren't matched as the road. So I think there's an element there for James as well, in terms of when we're looking at infrastructure, the hierarchy is mismatched.
Well, maybe this is where the kind of promising jam tomorrow is the problem with all of the carbon targets. Actually, in Leeds, they say 130% more public transport, bus, 100% more rail, 400% more cycling, 33% more walking, 30% less car use by 2030, and that gets us 43% of our way to our carbon target, right? So what kind of a conversation have we had with the public about the scale of this challenge? We haven't. We've told them that they should get an electric vehicle, and then we're surprised when things kick off. We just haven't had if it's an emergency, then it's on a scale that's not just completely incompatible with what the political dialogue, I think, at a national scale is generally saying. And that's not to say there aren't some really good things being done by government, but they're not going there in terms of the scale of the behaviour change that needs to be achieved.
James, would you agree with that? I mean, are you getting a sense from the councils you're working with that they feel there's a real emergency, or does it feel like a tick in the box and it's, well, we've done a few kilometres of cycleway, that's done?
Yeah, I certainly it doesn't feel to me with our clients a tick in the box by any means. I think the difficulty is budgets are finite, and certainly revenue budgets are shrinking. Capital investment costs money, obviously, and I think if you take an asset-led approach, which, to be fair, I think my background prior to joining the private sector side of contracting was in local authorities and was dealing with asset management and looking at asset-led approaches and how we can get the best out of the network for the longest period of time. I think there is still a need to treat the carriageway network because of the sheer volume of vehicles that it carries and will continue to carry. And I think trying to balance that, I think local authorities are getting a lot better and a lot smarter with their spending to look at the subsidiary infrastructure, so the walking and cycling facilities as well. But it's difficult because there's a finite pot of money to deliver these works. I think the more intelligent clients, if you like, the ones that are further ahead along on their asset approach, are now looking at preventative methods. So it costs less to maintain a road if it's been preventatively treated than it does to start again and reconstruct the whole thing. And over a period of time, those budgets will last longer. But I think we've just got to juggle the financing stresses around how do we maintain this great, big, vast asset, which is worth billions with a finite pot of money. So I can see and I sympathise with local authorities because it is difficult to maintain everything, unfortunately. But I am seeing more investment in footways and cycling, certainly in the urban areas. Then comes the question of how do you link a rural area to an urban area to allow that journey to continue on cycle or walking. It's not an easy nut to crack.
But just sort of rounding it off then, before we start looking at some of our other interesting things, I'd encourage you both to join in with our thinking on our heroes and hypocrisy around the climate, and bearing in mind that hypocrisy is better than no action at all. We agreed a few months ago, so you can't get it right first time every time. We've talked about the legal challenge around the road infrastructure RIS2, and obviously that's bumbling along. What about local plans? I have a nervousness with the government wanting all local authorities to have new local plans over the next 2 or 3 years. I'm really interested in where energy fits into the local plans, and there's not enough talk about local provision of energy. But are we going to see people like Client Earth and others taking local authorities to court or preventing the adoption of local plans because they haven't really got to grips with the net zero? If Greg says, even with all the incredible work being done at Leeds, and I've talked to Leeds, they really are top of their game in terms of sustainability. If even they're only going to get to 43%, what about the rest of them? Surely we're just going to see them all blocked up in the courts. Well, how do you both feel about that possibility, or is it just a case of we'll have to wait and see?
Really good question. I mean, for Leeds, I think part of the problem is they've gone for a political target, which is 0 by 2030. We're still selling petrol engine vehicles now and will be until 2029. So the chances of being 0 by 2030 feel to me enormously slim. So I think there's, in a sense, a lot of authorities have wanted to show to their communities that they're committed to this, and they've gone ambitious and early. 2028 is the earliest I've heard that we're going to have 0, but maybe you can better that. It's not a game show, but wouldn't be a great format, would it? But
so we'll be allowed to win a brand new car as a prize.
Well, yeah. Exactly, a caravan or a speedboat. But so they've set themselves up. But if you've chosen 2030 as your year where you're going to be 0, then how can you have a plan which is inconsistent with that, which you want your citizens to sign off to say where the house building is going to be? And that, at the end of the day, is what we're saying with the climate emergency and the carbon budgets, is that this is the amount of carbon that we've got. And if it doesn't fit, why are you bringing that forward as a plan? Imagine someone putting a congestion reduction plan forward that only increased congestion. I mean, actually, we've had that before by national government, but the idea of setting out deliberately strategies that are not going to do what they have to.
If you were to turn this on its head, would this be an opportunity for local authorities to really engage with their communities about their local plan, about what it would take from a development and infrastructure point of view to get to net zero, in terms of the technologies that they're supporting, the adaptation of their infrastructure, the nature of the housing development, what's happening in their high street, all of those different factors all combining into a net zero plan, or as close as they could get to it. That seems to be one way of being able to sort of close that circle from where we started this conversation about there having been no debate about it and just go and buy an electric vehicle, to actually having a plan around how you engage communities in that transition.
I think that would be a great move, and I think also to do it with the business community as well, about the sorts of contracting that's going to be done, the sorts of house building that needs to be done. Like, who's going to work with us in this framing of what we need to do for the next decade? Come forward, we're interested in working with you, but it's going to have to look like this. I think that would be without that honest kind of framing, why would you make the difficult choices? Because we've never really said that we have to.
Yeah.
And can I so on that, in that vein, I've got a question for James, and then with the same question but a little bit more for you, Greg. So one of the things that we always talk about is skills and the skills agenda, and to point out more elephants in our sanctuary that we're building here. Do we have the skills to be able to convert our road networks into, and as Greg called it, the urban renewal program, in order to get to 2030? So was it 9 years, 8.5 years time? Is your world, James, ready to make that fundamental in every city, in every town in the United Kingdom? And based on James's answer, Greg, with a fair wind, with all the right things, when we'll get to an outcome that could be net zero from a transport perspective? But James,
so I think if I can sort of give a very short synopsis of how I ended up in this chair today, knowing nothing at all about sustainability and the environment about a year ago, but being, I guess, a fairly senior business leader within Kier Highways with a background in local authorities, operational delivery, building roads safely, and at commercially sustainable delivery to have a successful business. Fast forward to where I am now as the sustainability lead and executive sponsor for the whole of the Highways business. So I look after about a third of the Highways business in Kier Group, but I'm the sustainability exec sponsor for the whole of Highways. So I have to look after the strategic Highways England, which is the bigger part of the business that I'm not operationally involved in. And the reason I'm now involved is because I think we have got some, and not just us, our peers, our competitors, our clients have got some very good people that have been alive and awake to this for quite some time, but trying to bring business leaders. And I think if you look at where we are with our chief executive, who is an absolute pioneer of what we're doing in the sustainability space and has been driving our sustainability strategy for the last sort of 6, 12, 18 months. I'm involved because the people that know about this stuff and have got the skills needed a senior leadership voice to take this forward and start putting our money where our mouth is, really. So we need to invest, and we had a call with Energize, who are helping us out with our carbon data. And the challenge I put to them was, well, what does this mean? Because with data, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. Is the data we've got good? Because I can only make good decisions if I've got good data. And the skills are there. The environmental team we've got, the sustainability team, the social value side of things, we've got some good brains on this. We're being pushed very hard by our clients. We're being pushed very hard by our prospective clients through procurements to not just tell them how good we are at filling potholes and building bridges, but more importantly, what are we doing about local skill shortages? How are we investing in young people? What are we doing around the social value piece? Because this is all part of sustainability. So sustainability is not just about carbon. Obviously, we're talking about carbon, but I don't think it's acceptable to any client that we're looking to do business with just to say we're going to have an electric fleet. That's expected. That's not new. That's not going to get us to net zero by 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. But there is some good stuff going on around the whole piece, so around the ecology side of things, around the social enterprises, around bringing skills into the industry. I use the analogy in my other hat with my ED&I hound that talks about, if you're always going to do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. And we refer to Nokia and then Apple coming along and building new mobile phones, etc., etc. So we're looking at universities. We're doing a lot of work in Guildford with the University of Guildford. I think we've been talking to Leeds University as well in some capacity. We're looking at a lot of sort of knowledge transfer partnerships around how we can bring graduates into our business to tell us how to do things differently. Working with British Safety Council previously around air quality monitoring. So there's a lot of stuff that goes above and beyond filling potholes. So a very long-winded way of saying, yes, I think the skills do exist. We need to invest in the skills or they'll disappear and go and work for Google or Amazon or someone. So we're in a sort of a hiatus at the moment within our industry because we've got to attract good and different people to our industry. It's not all about being bridge engineers. We've got good bridge engineers. We need good sustainability champions and people that know how to drive our business differently, make use of the data and support our clients to build on our aspirations of being net zero, or we won't do it.
Yeah. Greg, so with that in mind, we can build it. Will they come?
You mean will we get to our net zero commitments?
Will we get to our net zero commitments for transport in particular? Will we see that evolutionary change of demographics, attitudes to ownership of single car occupancy? Will we move on beyond the diesel bus and being choking behind it as you cycle into an urban centre? Once all of that's been dealt with, when do you think? What date would you give it?
I guess it's not the date; it's the pathway.
Oh, good answer.
Yeah, because electrification's going to happen, and once we get electrification, if we've got green energies supplying it, then the constraints around infrastructure and everything else begin to diminish. But only if we take the action that we need to in the next decade or on the way up to ramping up to electrification. That keeps us within our budget. So I'm actually quite pessimistic about that, and I don't think we get anywhere by just talking about the really good stuff that's happening. We've got to face up to the fact that we don't have a full set of policies in place. We're still putting stuff in the wrong place. We're still making the car cheaper relative to public transport, and we're still imagining that that's going to deliver us a mode shift that we say we require. So I don't think that the strategies that are there at the moment, they say what we would need to have in place, but they are not strategies that get us there. And that's probably what gets you annoyed at the weekends.
I think
bringing it a bit back to where we started about politicians say, we had this crazy situation, didn't we, in the budget where they froze fuel duty but allowed train fares to go up. We've just, in our local council, had our climate plan, went out for consultation and the questionnaire came back, and we've just put in a planning document that says that cars in homes in the town centres won't need car parking. Of course, the people who replied, we don't like that. So now the council are going, well, perhaps we better not do that then. It's this constant need to please today's voter. Is really holding us back, isn't it? If we've got to just say if we believe that this is an emergency, we have to act, and we've all got to change that behaviour. I think 2 days a week at home, if we can have a permanent half-term holiday, that to me is an absolute game changer, because nobody likes the school run traffic.
I think that this afternoon's conversation has been brilliant. So James and Greg, we're going to have you back. James, fantastic, because your side, what's very clear for me is the partnership working is essential. The councils have got to change the relationship with their contractors and start to push through some changes, and they will change again. One of the things I think that we're all realizing is that we've got to make the changes we can now. And then when the opportunity comes along, we've got to make more changes that will come along further down the line. What I'm really interested in, something that I think we should try to explore, is how we encourage this modal shift and get people to start realizing that building back better and going back to where we were is a wasted opportunity of something that's naturally come up that we would never have had, never. And getting people to communicate. But you're also right, Greg, that change is going to be quite painful. And in London, the shift for the hospitality sector and all the sandwich shops, although I think if you can walk for 5 minutes and pass 3 pret-a-manger's, Maybe they've got a few too many branches in London, but I'm sure they'll be on the phone straight away telling us that they're just there to supply what's needed by the clients. But there is a really big shift coming up. I want to move us on a little bit. The one thing, Johnny, I didn't hear from you is that apparently MI6 and James Bond are now getting terribly environmental. I don't know whether you read this story, that MI6 will now be spying on the major countries of the world to make sure that they're giving the right and truthful data behind their climate change work. Who knew that 007 was going green? But there we go.
Yeah. Not too sure that will make to the cinema, will it? I think that might be a direct release to...
Well, it'd just be nice to see the film, wouldn't it? That's been sitting there for over a year waiting for us to go and see it. But we're going to move on to our two regular things. And the Climate Hero of the Month, Vicky, is a posthumous award.
Yes. Obviously, we were all struck this month by the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, who, by the way, has a glacier named after him in Antarctica. What I think we're all sort of quite shocked about is that the number of people who believe they understand and know about the environment and conservation, how little we knew about how much he did in the world of conservation. I mean, it was the 1950s that he started talking about the greenhouse effect when it was not seen as even being a thing. So, obviously we know about his time as the first president of the World Wildlife Fund, and he carried on in an honorary basis right up to the present day. But his relationship with David Attenborough, which is fascinating. But I think that one of the things that struck me when I watched his funeral, and that was a real moment in time, and I wanted to ask whether the Land Rover was electric, but what a great Land Rover we had for his funeral was. If you listened to the service itself, the reading that he chose was all about nature. It was all about the natural world. It referred to rainbows and glaciers and hailstones. Something I've never ever heard. That sort of finding that content just gave me the impression of how deep his love of nature went. And he had said, and I got this from the World Wildlife Fund's website, that if nature doesn't survive, neither will man. And I mean, that's such a profound statement to sort of say we have no prior right to this earth over the animals. And I think perhaps if we remembered just simple things like that, we would all be better for it. So Johnny is agreeing with me. So I think
indeed, yeah. And it was for me. It was. I was struck, and it. It's sad. I feel sad for the death and sad for the family. I feel personally sad that I didn't know about that. And, his son and Prince Charles and all his amazing work that he does for conservation, you hear about, but maybe it's a generational thing, but that was lost on me. So it was, sad, but very warm to hear what an amazing, career he had in conservation, and should be celebrated as we're celebrating him here.
And it's also, I know that I've spoken to a few politicians over the years who always go on about the custodians of estates. You see how I avoided the sort of negative side of that. And he was he was responsible for Windsor Great Park and all the work that he did there over the years to make sure that park carried on investing in the future. And I think that's amazing. But that thought that there are, it's not about a 4-year political cycle. It's about 100 years and more. And I think that that's one of the challenges that our generation are going to face more and more and more, is get over the 4-year voting cycle. You've got to do something here that's going to last 100, 200 years, or we're in serious trouble. And talking about something that's caused a bit of a storm. Now, I just want to point out, just because I want to make Keith's life easier, when we talk about hypocrites, we are, with tongue in cheek, pointing out that sometimes even when your heart is in the right place, when you're seeking to do the right thing by the world, you can cause a complete nightmare, a storm in a beehive. This is an M&S storm in a beehive. It's not your normal beehive problems. This is not that Vicky Slade's just upset all her neighbours with her beehives. This is one of the great retailers of this country trying to do the right thing as part of their 5-year Farming with Nature program. So everything about this is this person got up and wrote this because they wanted to do good. The only problem is with their beehives that are all over the country at 25 different farms, so that you can wake up to the best ever honey. They're using a bee that's not from the UK. And in fact, they've missed, according to the Bugs Life charity. I love that. There's a film called Bugs Life. I didn't realise that it was a charity as well. They've got the wrong bee, and which must be devastating if you've worked very hard, got all your marketing together. And also, what's fantastic about Bugs Life is another element that I've just been reading it because I was late for the planning meeting. Everyone, I admit it, and I got given this to do as a penance. But there are 270 different bee species in this country, and they haven't been recorded since 1990. So I don't know what you've been doing, Johnny. Why have you been out there checking how many bees there are? But there's a real decline in our own bees in this country. And so, Marks and Spencer's, we love that you're trying it, but you do win the hypocrite of the month because all of your good work has been shot down in flames because you didn't quite get the message. But then it's an M&S beehive nightmare, and that's very special.
Can I just on that?
Yes,
let's just take some positives out of this, okay? First and foremost, I'm sure M&S honey is fantastic.
I'm sure.
But just to put a little plug out for local artisan beekeepers, of which we've run out of this year. So if you want any from me, you've got to wait till October. Local honey is known to do wonders for your hay fever. So, if you're worried about supporting the M&S honey and you want to, you've got hay fever, go find a beekeeper at the end of your road, because that's the very best honey you can have. And if you want to do right by bees, obviously last week was Earth Day. 5 amazing themes. Oh, why does the phone always ring? 5 amazing themes on for Earth Day. And one of them is about this citizen scientist. And one of the things you can do on the Citizen Scientist website is you can actually plot bees. So, you can find out whether in your area bees have a problem.
Now, Nick, I'm surprised that you missed that Marks and Spencer's sustainability program was called Plan A. And do you not think they now need a Plan B?
Well, if they do this again, they'll need a C and a D and an E. But, one of the things that I'm very aware of as well is that people are now looking at everyone. And you've got to be really, really careful. And, from our little world, which at Kratos, we've been working and looking at how we're going to contribute. It makes you really realise that, before you open your mouth and you stand up and say, I'm doing this, think it through the best you can. Because people are out there to challenge you. The Guardian newspaper on this occasion, but it's right for us all to be challenged, and it's a really big task ahead of us. But that mustn't stop us from having a go and moving forward.
Absolutely, Nick. I think there's just sort of one final thing for me is that you have to be prepared to take the brickbats, because doing nothing ain't an option either. I recalled in our first program of doing this. That there was the 10-point government plan for the Green Industrial Revolution had been, the minister has been questioned about it, and the journalist had said, "Oh well, it's all too complicated, and you've got 10 points. I just need to talk about 5." It's that. So, and you've just heard in the transport conversation how interrelated everything is. It's not just about technology. Yes, technology is going to be very important, but it's also about behavior. It's also about infrastructure. It's also about adaptation and resilience and what we do in terms of contracts and commercial and asset management. All of that sort of stuff needs to come together. And it's no good us just sort of waiting because we've got to solve Johnny's sanctuary of elephants before we get on and do stuff. We need to be doing stuff now. And so, whatever is good, let's get on and do. And if we get it wrong, then we hold our hands up and carry on and do the next thing.
And I totally agree with that. I just wanted to sort of address that this is being, we're putting these together as Stantec and Kratos each month. We thoroughly enjoy them. And Greg and James joining us, thank you so much. You really make an impact on us and all the work that we're doing. So even just talking to us is great. But we've got lots of people watching in now, and we've got to encourage people to go forward. I ask again, I invite you all to come forward. If you're watching this live or you're watching this on the recorded version, please come forward and tell us about your own journeys, what you're trying to do. And for the local politicians, this cannot be ignored. National politicians, just take a chill pill. While you're out on the stump, there's a lot of people who realise that the clock is ticking and we do have to start making a difference. So please come and join us and make a difference and get learning as we go along, because it ain't getting any better. And James and Greg, you've made a real impact on me today. So thank you so much for your time. We'll see you again soon. Next month, we're back earlier on the 24th of May because it's a bank holiday. And we're just going to go driving around in our petrol-head cars, aren't we, on that? No, we're not. But we'll see you on the 24th of May. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.